Let me ask you something. When you hear the phrase, I had a 0 day, what comes to mind? Probably some version of collapse, lying in bed all day, phone in hand, curtains drawn, nothing accomplished. That's the picture we've been sold, and it's wrong. It's not just inaccurate, it's dangerous because it sets up a standard so extreme that almost none of us ever violate it, which means almost none of us ever feel the weight of what a real 0 day actually costs. Here's the truth. A 0 day isn't a day where you did nothing. It's a day where you did nothing that moved you toward the life you say you want. You can be exhausted from work, drowning in obligations, running on fumes, and still not have a 0 day because somewhere in there you did one thing, however small, that whispered to your future self, I'm still building this. That's the redefinition that changes everything. Because here's what nobody tells you about progress. It was never supposed to look like the highlight reel. We've been conditioned by a culture obsessed with breakthroughs, transformations, before and afters, to believe that anything less than dramatic doesn't count. So we wait. We wait for the perfect morning, the fully charged motivation, the day when everything aligns, and while we're waiting, months pass, years pass, and nothing was built because we disqualified every small moment as not enough to matter. I want you to sit with this idea, 1% counts, 1 page counts, 1 rep counts, 1 kind word to a stranger, 1 uncomfortable phone call you finally made, 1 moment you chose courage over comfort. These are not consolation prizes for the days you couldn't do more. They are the entire game because progress was never a mountain you climb in a single afternoon. It is a psychological pattern you install, decision by decision, proof by proof, until your brain stops asking, do I feel like it today? And starts operating from a different question entirely. Who am I and what does that person do today? This is where most people get stuck, not because they lack ambition, but because they've internalized an all or nothing standard that guarantees failure. If today isn't a full workout, why bother with 10 minutes? If I can't write the whole chapter, why write anything? That voice feels like discipline. It is actually the enemy of discipline because discipline was never about intensity. It's about frequency. It's about refusing to let the story of your life include days where you gave up entirely on the version of you that you're trying to become. So today, right now, I want you to release yourself from the tyranny of enough. Enough was always a moving target designed to keep you frozen. What's not moving is this. Did you today do something, anything in the direction of the life you're building? If yes, that day counts. That day was not wasted. That day was a brick. And bricks, ladies and gentlemen, are where this gets interesting because a single brick doesn't look like much. It doesn't look like a home, a legacy, a transformed life, but stack enough of them day after day and something remarkable starts to happen, something almost invisible in the moment and undeniable in the rearview mirror. That's where we're headed next. Not just what counts as progress, but what happens when you stop measuring the single day and start trusting the compound. Let's talk about the compound. Not the financial kind, though the principle is identical, but the human kind. The compound of a single decision repeated until it stops being a decision and starts being who you are. Here's what almost nobody truly grasps about compounding. In the early stages, it is boring. It is unimpressive. It looks like nothing is happening. You do 1 push-up and you look the same. You write 1 paragraph and the book is still not written. You save $1 and you're still not wealthy. And because human beings are wired to seek evidence, visible, immediate, dopamine triggering evidence, we mistake the absence of a dramatic result for the absence of progress. That mistake, that single misunderstanding of how growth actually works, is responsible for more abandoned goals than laziness ever was. I want you to understand something about how compounding actually behaves. Because it's not linear, it's exponential. And exponential curves have a signature characteristic. For a long time, they look flat. They look like nothing. And then seemingly out of nowhere, they bend upward so sharply it looks like magic to everyone. Watching, it is not magic, it is math. It is the accumulated weight of every unremarkable, unglamorous, unwitnessed repetition that came before the moment anyone else noticed. This is the part that separates people who transform their lives from people who talk about transforming their lives. The willingness to keep making deposits into an account that isn't visibly paying interest yet. That single push-up isn't about the push-up. It's a signal you're sending to the deepest part of your psychology, a vote, as we said, for a future identity. And votes accumulate. They don't evaporate because you didn't see the result today. They sit there quietly building toward a threshold. Think about what 1% repeated daily actually becomes. It's not addition, it's multiplication. Small improvements compounded consistently don't just add up, they multiply against each other, each gain becoming the platform the next gain stands on. That's why the person who's been showing up for 3 years doesn't look 3 years further along. Then the person who started 6 months ago, they look like they're playing an entirely different game. That's the nature of the curve. But here's the psychological trap, and I need you to hear this clearly, because the early returns are invisible. Most people quit precisely at the moment they are closest to the bend in the curve. They interpret flatness as failure. They interpret quiet as proof that the method doesn't work. And so they stop, not because the compound wasn't working, but because they couldn't tolerate operating on faith in a process they couldn't yet see with their eyes. This is where trust has to replace evidence. Not blind trust, informed trust, the kind that comes from understanding the actual mechanics of growth. You are not failing when day 40 feels the same as day 1. You are exactly on schedule. Every discipline that has ever produced a master, every fortune that has ever been built, every transformation that has ever moved someone from where they were to who they became, all of it obeyed this same quiet law. Small, unseen, repeated action, compounding in the dark until it could no longer stay hidden. So the question isn't whether one push-up matters. The question is whether you're willing to keep making that deposit day after day long enough for the curve to bend. Because here's the truth that changes everything. It's never the leap that transforms a life. It's the relentless, invisible stacking of ordinary days that no one was watching until suddenly everyone is. Now let's talk about a lie. A lie so deeply embedded in our culture that most people build their entire approach to change around it. The lie is this, that transformation comes from intensity, that the people who win are the ones who go hardest, who grind the longest, who white-knuckle their way through some heroic burst of willpower until the goal surrenders. It makes for a great movie montage. It is almost never how a real life gets built. Motivation by its very nature is a feeling, and feelings are the least reliable engine you could possibly choose to run your life on. Motivation is high when you're inspired, when you've just watched something that lit you up, when the pain of staying the same finally outweighs the fear of change. But motivation is a weather system. It shifts. It's high on Monday and gone by Wednesday. And if Wednesday is when your entire plan collapses, you were never building a life, you were riding a mood. What actually builds a life is something far less glamorous and far more powerful. A system, a structure so ingrained that it doesn't ask permission from how you feel on a given day. Discipline isn't the absence of emotion, it's the refusal to let emotion be the deciding vote. And here's the deeper psychological truth underneath that. Every time you act in alignment with your system, despite not feeling like it, you are proving to your own nervous system that you are someone who can be trusted, not by others, by yourself. And self-trust, once built, becomes the foundation every other pursuit stands on. This is precisely why intensity on its own so often fails. Think about the person who goes all out the 5-hour workout after months of nothing, the 12-hour writing binge, the radical 7-day detox. It feels powerful in the moment. It generates a story they can tell. But intensity without consistency is a candle burning at both ends, brilliant and brief. The body breaks down, the motivation that fueled the burst evaporates as fast as it appeared. And what's left is often worse than where they started. Exhaustion, injury, or the quiet shame of another attempt that didn't stick. Compare that to the person doing something modest, sustainable, almost unimpressive, but doing it every single day, rain or shine, motivated or not. We've already talked about why that compounds. But there's something else happening beneath the surface, something psychological and profound. Consistency rewires identity in a way intensity never can. A burst of effort says, I did something impressive once. Daily consistency says, this is who I am. And human beings don't act long-term based on what they did. They act based on who they believe. They are. So I want you to ask yourself, honestly, are you designing a life around how you'll feel on your best day or around what you can sustain on your worst one? Because your worst days are not the exception in a long life. They are a guarantee. The plan that only works when you're inspired is not a plan, it's a hope. And hope without structure beneath it collapses the very first time life gets hard, which statistically is going to be soon. Build the system that survives the bad days, and you won't need the good ones to carry you. Because in the end, it is not the fire of a single explosive effort that forges a life. It is the steady, patient heat of showing up again and again, long after everyone else's motivation has gone cold. Let me ask you a question that might sting a little. How many times in your life have you not started something, not because you were lazy, not because you didn't care, but because you knew you couldn't do it perfectly, so some part of you decided it wasn't even worth doing? The workout you skipped because you only had 15 minutes instead of 60. The manuscript you never opened because you couldn't write for 3 uninterrupted hours. The apology you never made because you couldn't find the perfect words. That right there is one of the most quietly destructive forces operating in the human psyche, and it hides in a costume that looks like high standards. We need to name it precisely. This is not perfectionism as diligence. This is perfectionism as self-sabotage wearing a disguise. Somewhere along the way, many of us absorbed a brutal binary equation. Either I do this fully, completely correctly, or I don't do it at all. And on the surface, that sounds like commitment. It sounds like someone who takes things seriously. But look underneath it, and what you'll actually find is fear of doing something imperfectly. And having that imperfection means something about your worth. So the mind, brilliant at protecting you from discomfort, offers you an escape hatch. Don't attempt it, and you can never fail at it. Here's the problem with that bargain. Every time you take it, you're not actually protecting yourself from failure. You're guaranteeing it. Because a day where you did nothing toward your goal, dressed up as waiting until I can do it right, is still a 0 day. It just feels more respectable. It feels like restraint instead of retreat. But your future doesn't care about the story you told yourself to justify the inaction. It only responds to what you actually did. This is where we have to make a decision consciously, deliberately about what we value more. The comfort of an untarnished attempt or the momentum of an imperfect one. And I want to be very direct with you. Imperfect action beats perfect inaction every single time, with no exceptions in any domain of human achievement you could name. The relationship repaired by an awkward, fumbling conversation beats the one left to rot in silence. While you search for the right words, the business launched with an unfinished product beats the one that stayed a flawless idea in someone's notebook for a decade. The 10-minute workout beats the workout that never happened because it couldn't be 60. Because here's what perfectionism never tells you. Nothing you attempt for the first time will be done well. Nothing. Not because you're inadequate, but because that is the actual mechanism of mastery you produce. Something mediocre, then something slightly less mediocre, then something competent, then eventually something excellent. And every single step in that chain was by definition not yet the finished version. If you refuse to act until you can guarantee excellence, you're refusing to ever begin the only process that has ever produced excellence in a human life. So today, I want you to release the all or nothing contract you signed with yourself, likely without even realizing it. Lower the bar for entry, not for standards, because those are two different things. Let today's version be clumsy. Let it be small. Let it be far from what you'll eventually produce. That's not weakness. That's the price of admission every master has paid. Because in the end, the goal was never to do it perfectly. The goal was to become someone who does it at all, and that person, the one who shows up unfinished and imperfect and still shows up, is the only version of you who ever gets to become the one who's great. Now I want to take you somewhere deeper than habits, deeper than systems, deeper than even the compound we talked about. Because underneath all of that, there's a question that determines everything else. Who do you actually believe you are? Here's what most people get backwards. They think identity is the result of achievement, that you become confident once you succeed, disciplined once you see results, worthy once the evidence piles up high enough to convince you. But that gets the entire mechanism exactly upside down. Identity isn't the reward at the end of the process. Identity is the engine that drives it. You don't act your way into a new identity after the fact. You act your way into it one small, deliberate choice at a time, and the identity forms first, quietly, long before the outside world has any proof of it. This is why that single non-zero day matters so much more than its size would suggest. When you do the small thing, the one page, the one workout, the one uncomfortable conversation, you're not just moving a project forward, you are casting a vote. And I mean that in the most literal psychological sense. Every action is a ballot cast for the kind of person you believe yourself to be. One vote doesn't decide the election, but elections aren't won by one vote. They're won by accumulation, by thousands of small ballots cast in the same direction until the outcome becomes undeniable. You are, at every moment in the middle of an election for your own identity, and you are the only one voting. This reframes the entire conversation we've been having. It's not really about the push-up. It was never about the push-up. It's about who cast the vote to do it. It's not about the paragraph. It's about who showed up to write it despite not feeling like it. Because here's the profound truth hiding inside this idea. Outcomes are often outside of your control. The market can crash. The manuscript can get rejected. The relationship can still struggle despite your best effort. But the vote, the decision to show up as the person you're building, that is entirely, completely non-negotiably yours. Nobody can take that away from you, and nobody can cast it for you. This is why the all or nothing trap we discussed is so much more dangerous than it appears on the surface. It's not simply that you miss a day of progress. It's that you cast a vote for the identity of someone who quits when conditions aren't ideal. And that vote doesn't disappear either. It accumulates too in the opposite direction, quietly building a self-concept of someone who needs permission or perfect circumstances or motivation before they're willing to act. Every path leads somewhere. The only question is which version of yourself you're electing, one choice at a time. So I want you to change the internal question you ask yourself each day. Stop asking, do I feel like doing this? That question keeps you tethered to a mood, and moods were never meant to run your life. Start asking instead, what would the person I'm building choose to do right now? That single shift from feeling to identity, from mood to mission, is one of the most powerful psychological tools available to any human being, and it costs you nothing to use it starting today. Because here's the truth underneath everything we've covered so far. You're not waiting to become someone, you are becoming someone right now, in this very moment. Based on the vote you're about to cast the second you leave this room. The only question left is what all of these votes added together are ultimately building. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is exactly where we're headed next. So let's bring this all the way home. Everything we've talked about, redefining what counts as progress. Trusting the invisible compound, choosing consistency over intensity, releasing the all or nothing trap, and understanding that every action is a vote for your identity. All of it points toward a single, unavoidable conclusion. Your best life is not an event. It is not a destination you arrive at breathless. On some future Tuesday, when everything finally comes together, your best life is an accumulation. It is built brick by brick in exactly the kind of ordinary day you're standing in right now. I need you to really sit with that because it cuts against almost everything we've been taught to believe about transformation. We grow up watching the highlight reel, the finish line, the graduation, the ribbon cutting, the victory lap, and we mistake the celebration for the construction, but nobody builds a cathedral by admiring the steeple. Someone laid a foundation stone by stone in the mud on days no one was watching, long before there was anything beautiful to photograph. Your life is no different. The moment you're waiting for isn't the building. It's just the ribbon they cut after the building is already done. This is why the question, when will I finally get there, is in some sense the wrong question entirely. There is no there. There is no single day where the transformed version of you finally clicks into place and the work is over. There is only an endless, ongoing accumulation of days where you either voted for growth or you didn't. And your best life is simply the sum total of those votes tallied over years instead of moments. The people you admire most, the ones whose lives look from the outside like some kind of miracle. They didn't get a miracle, they got years. Ordinary, repeated, unremarkable years, made extraordinary only by the fact that they refused to let too many of those days go to zero. So here's what I want you to walk out of this room and do, not someday, not when conditions are perfect, today. I want you to look at your life honestly and ask, what is the smallest possible action I can take right now that moves me 1 inch closer to who I'm building? Not the perfect action, not the impressive one, the smallest one that still counts as something. And then I want you to do it not because it will transform your life today, but because it will cast the vote. And tomorrow I want you to do it again, and the day after that, because that is the entire secret. There was never a bigger one hiding somewhere else. Understand this, you will never feel ready. You will never have all the motivation lined up, all the circumstances ideal, all the fear fully resolved before you act. That feeling of readiness you're waiting for is not a prerequisite for building your best life. It is often the reward that shows up after you've already been building it for a while. Stop waiting for permission that was never going to arrive and start casting the vote you have complete power over right now, exactly as you are. Because in the end, your best life will not be built in some singular dramatic moment you can point to and say, that's when everything changed. It will be built in the accumulation of days, just like today, days when you refuse to let it be. 0. So go cast the vote, build the brick. Let today be the day the compounding begins, because your best life isn't coming. It's being built one non-zero day at a time, starting the second you walk out that door. So let's come back to where we started, a 0 day. That's the enemy we came here to name today. Not failure, not fear, not even circumstance. The enemy was always the belief that today didn't count, but now you know better. You know that progress was never about the size of the action, only the direction of it. You know that the compound doesn't care whether you can see it working, it's working anyway. In the dark, waiting for the day it breaks the surface. You know that consistency will carry you further than 100 bursts of motivation ever could. You know that the version of you who does it imperfectly will always outlast the version of you waiting to do it perfectly. You know that every single one of those actions was never really about the task. It was a vote cast for the person you are becoming. And you know now that your best life was never a place you arrived. It's a structure you build, one brick, one vote, one non-zero day at a time. So here's my challenge to you. Not next week, not tomorrow, not when things settle down today. Before your head hits the pillow tonight, I want you to do one thing, however small, however imperfect, however unimpressive it may feel, that moves you toward the life you say you want. That's it. That's the whole assignment. Not a transformation, not a miracle. One vote, because I promise you this, the version of you 5 years from now is being built right now, in this exact moment, by the decision you're about to make, the second you walk out of this room. That future self is watching. They're waiting to see whether today becomes another brick in their foundation or another 0 in their story. Don't give them a 0, give them a brick, give them a vote, give them a day that counted. And when you stack enough of those days together, when you refuse over and over to let the count go to 0, you will look up one day and realize something extraordinary. You didn't just avoid the 0. You built the life. So go make today count. No 0 days starting now.